as an international student, and what you should start thinking about now if you are trying to start grad school, or if you are in grad school, or even after grad school, depending on the state that you are. All right, in today's short discussion, I'm going to talk about the different types of visas for foreign students. We're going to talk about post-grad work permits for each visa, and also we'll talk about the paths to permanent residency. And there is a part where you can sponsor yourself. It's not common, but it's doable. And what you need to know now as a student if you are trying to pursue any of these paths. Now, let's talk about types of visas for foreign students and exchange visitors. There are 4 different types. The most common one is for F1 students, what we call F1 visas. And those are for people going to academic institutions at all levels, from high school to, tertiary or PhD institutions. Now, there is another one called M1. Those are for vocational institutions or non-academic institutions, people going to religious schools or something. Now, there is another class called M3 and F3, which is, at least for the people I'm talking to, really none of your business if you are not from Mexico or Canada. And this usually is for people that are close to the border and can easily commute between the US and Canada or Mexico. So it's really none of your business as Africans, right? Now, there is a last one called J1, which is usually for people in cultural exchange programs or educational exchange programs, like people coming for temporary study or like getting trained in, maybe you're going to do your research here and go back home, or nurses or something, or medical professionals, certain medical professionals. But there's a lot of students that can also be in this category. Now, let's talk about supporting visa or dependent visas for each of these. For F1 and M1, you can get F2 and M2 visas respectively for your spouse or children, but they cannot work legally in the United States. They are unable to work, so they'll just accompany you to give you emotional and moral support. Now, for J2 visas, the spouses and children of people that get these J2 visas can work legally in the United States. So that sounds cool, right? You would think that sounds cool. However, what I will encourage you to do is to make sure you go for the F1 visa, because this class of visas have better post-grad opportunities. The US knows what they are doing when they allowed the spouses of those J1 people to work, right? So there's a trade-off. But let me explain why you need to go for, or to stick to getting the F1 visa. So to explain that, I'm going to talk about post-grad work permits. Now, for F1 visas, that's the one I recommend. So everyone, regardless of your field, irrespective of your field, you get like a one year optical training visa. We call it F1 OPT. So you are able to work during this period, regardless of your field. Now, for those in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics related fields, this OPT work permit can be extended for another 24 months. So that means people that are not in STEM fields, they only get 1 year, while those that are in STEM fields get 3 years in total if they choose to extend. Now, after this 1 year or 3 years, what you must now do is to change status. Your status as an F1 or OPT student. Now, there are different ways people do this. These are some of the common ones. Of course, if you have a family here, they can file for you. file your green card for you. And when they say change status, we are talking about becoming a permanent resident now. So if you can't do that, then you have to leave the United States within, I don't know, a number of days. So you can either do that by family sponsored visas if you have someone here, but I know most of us don't have that person here. Then you can either do spousal visas. I know people that intentionally, maybe they are dating back home and they just leave their spouse and say, okay, I'm getting married because of papers, right? And there are a lot of we're in the streets now. There are a lot of pay for paper package when it comes to marriages, which I do not recommend, but that happens. So that's why I put it quote unquote illegal. Now there are employer-sponsored visas, which has its own downsides, but I will talk about the most common ones are the H-1B visa and the O-1 visa. Now, before employers can sponsor you, there is a lot of regulatory restrictions. They need to be able to prove that there are no other Americans that are qualified for that same job. So they have to do adverts, interview people. They have to spend money on lawyers to even do the filing for you. So there's just a lot of bottlenecks. And also there is a limited amount of H-1B or employer-sponsored visas that the US can give out each year, and sometimes I think it's around 50,000 per year. So if and you can imagine the number of companies that need H-1B visas. So I've seen situations where people even got companies that are willing to sponsor them, but because of the limitation on the number of H-1B visas available, they couldn't get it. So eventually they had to leave the US. Now the H-1B is done in form of a lottery for those who are qualified. So do you really want to live your life to luck? That's if you are willing, you even find someone that is going to do that. Not a lot of organizations are willing to even sponsor you. So what most people do is they will just use your OPT. They will employ you, use your OPT period, and after that they would just let you go and employ other OPT people. So I know that happens. Now, another thing you can do is because you don't want to be out of status, you can go for another degree. Maybe you are a master's student, now go for a PhD or another PhD just to remain in the US. That's not fun, right? Now, the last one is sponsoring yourself for a green card. It's not a common route because it's difficult, but it's doable if you plan. We'll talk about that later. Now, for the J1 visa students, they are called exchange visitors. They are labeled visitors even by law. So the most common post-grad extension that you can have is it's not even an extension, but in most cases you can get up to 16 or 12 months. But the common thing is after you're done, they expect you to leave the US in 30 days. So because of this condition that you have to go back home, it's by US law, it's in the US, written in US law that people with J1 visas are visitors and they have to go back home after their studies. So because of this, it's really rare to be able to change status. Now, most of the people in this situation must go through maybe family or spousal route to do that. It's even difficult for an employer to file for you on a J1 visa. So it's very rare, but this condition can be waived. This condition to go back home can be waived, but it's rare. So there are more post-grad options for the F1 students than the J1 students, even though the J1 students can and their spouses can work legally in the US. So that's why I recommend the F1 visa. So if there's any school dangling J1 visas in front of you, think about your long-term goals and decide if you want it or not.